Well, welcome to the third Inside Business Live event from the Postal Courier. We're really thrilled that you're all here on a rainy, gray morning, and I'm sure traffic wasn't easy either. But thank you for coming. We're, like I said, really glad to have you here. As I said, this is the third Inside Business Live that we've hosted. The first one was on the future of energy in our state. Certainly with everything that's going on with SCANA and St. Cooper, that was a topic of high interest. And we just did a panel on the highway crisis. And today we're going to have something that very closely related to the topic of our last event. First, I want to thank our sponsors, Trident Academy and Charleston Southern University. Thank you very much for your support of this event and support of the Postal Courier. Today, what we're going to talk a little bit about, if those of you haven't picked up a newspaper in the last 2 days or seen it on social media, is something that we're very proud of. And I think today's Inside Business Live is what I'm very excited about for that reason. We're going to talk a little bit about the why behind that lack of skilled workforce that we discussed in our last event. And tied in directly to that is a great, I think, piece of work that Jennifer and Dad were intimately involved in. They'll be our moderators for today's panel. And that's taking a look at South Carolina's educational, and I think it's fair to say we're at a bit of a crisis point. And it was an 8-month project that we worked on. It took roughly 20 journalists involved in some capacity to create that. And I think that it really highlights some of the systemic and historic issues that face our state as we try to prepare our young people for the workforce that awaits them and for the economy, the new economy that's been created in South Carolina that's helping us all grow and thrive. I want to stress, of course, that one of the things that respond to some of the feedback we've heard about the project, this is not any kind of individual issue or group issue or one school district. This is a systemic issue that we need to deal with. It has to do with deep-seated ideas and concepts. I mean, it's a tough project. It's a tough concept to get your mind wrapped around. I think it's even been tough for our state lawmakers. There's a lot of history they're dealing with. The funding formula is so complex that I think most of them don't understand it. And so it's a big problem. But I feel really good about the fact that there's so many people in this room here today that are interested in that. It's critical that you all make your voices heard as we get through this process. Like I said, it's a big problem. It's going to take big, scalable solutions. But with together, everybody in this room, I think we can make great progress toward that. And I'm going to turn this panel over now to Jennifer and Dan, and we're going to talk a little bit about the topic.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming out. We really appreciate it. It's nice to see all of you here. And thanks also to our panelists who are joining us. It's going to be a really great conversation, I think. Maybe it would be helpful. How many of you have had a chance to take a look at the project that's been running in the paper and also up online? Okay, great. How many of you have read the whole thing? Awesome. Okay, great. So we, like Mitch said, we started this about 8-9 months ago. We decided that we wanted to take a look at why South Carolina remains so persistently at the bottom of education rankings. This is not news, right? We all know that South Carolina's had problems with its education, but we really wanted to get at why. What makes us different from other states? Other states in the Southeast have struggled with similar problems going back to the days of segregation and forward. So we wanted to take a broad look at what this involved, and we for instance, took a look at the history of South Carolina and what role the history of segregation in particular has played. Moving into legislative actions, Mitch mentioned the funding formulas that have become so complicated that it's difficult even for legislators to understand how that works. We tried to put together a graphic, for instance, that explains it, which kind of became the running joke of the series because it's so difficult to understand how do you explain something so that regular readers can understand it when it is just a beast. So we looked at everything from funding to the history of the state, and then also the impact on businesses, which I think is probably the piece that will interest you the most here. If we are not producing a workforce that can fill your needs, then the education system is not fulfilling its role. One of the most striking things I can say for me personally was to go out into rural communities and see what huge disparities exist between our really great schools and our struggling schools. And I hope that the series will convey what Ted called two South Carolinas. So I think from our perspective, we tried to really look at this on a statewide level so that we could hopefully instigate a conversation all around the state. So maybe a good starting point, since most of us, I assume, are more from the Charleston area, would be maybe, John, if you want to take a stab at this. I think it would be fantastic to think about what are the major problems that we're dealing with as far as education here in the Charleston area. And I know you guys at Cradle to Career have really gone in depth on that. Do you want to take a first stab at what do you see as being the major problems that we're facing here in the Tri-County area?
That's a great softball question.
Can you all hear me back there?
Yeah.
Great. Well, first of all, I thought it was an excellent piece. All 5 segments, fact-based, hard-hitting, no punches pulled. And I commend you for that. The lens that we apply to this work has caused us to conclude that what's underway here in this region, 3 counties and 4 school districts, as well as the state, is systems failure. A term that should be treated objectively and that should be handled with the knowledge that the victims of these failed systems are every bit as much the teachers and administrators who are in almost heroic fashion doing the best that they can to teach every child and help every child learn. The differences between one district and another, one school and another, and statewide, district by district, are simply differences in the width of the bell curve. The same issues exist in every district. They represent clear and one would have to say intentional racial bias against kids of color and kids of poverty, and that unless and until we focus on that fact and start there, I don't think we have much chance of reforming a system that is clearly out of date and in need of attention up and down the continuum.
So one other sort of theme that we looked at is what has worked in the past in South Carolina. And in looking at that, we looked at the Education Improvement Act in the 1980s, which was sort of the last really big comprehensive overhaul of education that was attempted here. And that brought us to Terry, who was sort of an architect of that. And I wonder what worked then. I know one of the big themes of that legislation was that the business community stepped up and said, we have a real problem here. So I wonder if you talk about what the landscape looked like in the 80s and maybe if you see any parallels to today.
Thank you. Yes, it was very similar, in fact. Since we're here and we're not in education, let me do a test. So if we were in 2005, say 2005, the Education Improvement Act was put together in 1984, where would you think South Carolina, I'll give you 3 options, you can raise your hand to one of them. Where do you think South Carolina ranked in improvement from 84 to 2005? There are 3 choices. Top 5, bottom 5, didn't improve. Okay, we'll start with, raise your hand if you think it didn't improve from 84 to 2005. Okay. Raise your hand if you think we were in the bottom 5 in improvement from 2000 to 2005. And how many would raise your hand that we were in the top 5 in 2005? Okay, 1 hand. She's the only one that's correct. In 2005, from 1984 to 2005, looking at NAEP, it's called a Nation's Report Card in Reading, Math, Science, and Writing, add them up into a composite index. South Carolina, in improvement, ranked 5th. And we're actually above the national average in a number of indicators. Then the budget crisis hit in the state, and we've never recovered. Just to give you some scale. Right now, the average classroom in the state, average classroom, has $20,000 less in real buying power than they had in 2006. No increase in buying power in 10 years. Think of the lost supplies, equipment, curriculum, and low teacher salaries, which is a huge problem. So that was that same conditions were present in '83. So what changed it? 4 key components. One is you have to have a comprehensive set of new opportunities and strategies. Early childhood, elementary, middle, and high school. It can't be just one thing. It has to be a comprehensive set of strategies. For example, in a new package, you could say that every school has to have high-quality, enriching after-school and summer opportunities. That's just one. At the high school level, you could say every high school has to have lots of ways in which kids can get pathways to college. After-school, summers, weekends, dual enrollment, tech prep, new tech high schools, apprenticeships, all that. That's it, just one. You have to have a package of reforms, and that's what was put together, and that's what the business community demanded. The second key ingredient, well, I think I'm smart. It doesn't make any difference if I like something and teachers and principals hate it, and parents. So you need to have a, what I call grassroots and grass tops effort at looking from the bottom to the top of what we need to do next. And that's what we did. We should do that now, if nothing else, just in the Trident area. Involve thousands of teachers, principals, local community leaders, and say, what do we need to really move forward in all those grades? Well, that's going on. All of you and your peers should be in this region looking at what do leaders think we should do next and come together and come up with a comprehensive package that has grassroots and grass tops support. One little caveat here, one of the most difficult things is to think scale. Just in the Tri-County area, we have 130,000 kids in public school, 120 schools. Statewide, 750,000 kids, 1,200 schools. So when you think of impacting the whole region or state, you have to think scale, comprehensive. And the final thing is critical. It's a 5-letter dirty word, money. It is a hollow rhetoric for teachers and parents and principals say we're going to improve graduation rate, college going, workforce readiness, and say we're going to do it on the same money you had 10 years ago. There's a school reform effort, a school reform expert who studied this a lot in the country said for a new initiative you need about $1,000 a student. So here's what I'm going to propose, and then you might not ask me to say anything else. Why don't we, in the Tri-County area, put together $1,000 a student times 120,000 students, $120 million education and economic development fund to fund a comprehensive package that the people on the ground and the state and the leaders want to do. Now, you could say the state should do that, right? I would normally agree. I've helped do it at the state level, but when I read your articles, I had heartburn. I do not see this happening at the state level. I wish it would. What about if we put that together and then went to the state, just like we did with 526, the ports, the museum, and say, we'll put in 70 million, you put in 40. Anyhow, that happened because business leaders at the top, statewide, here in Charleston and every other town, with parents and teachers and superintendents said, let's do something big, and it happened and it made a difference. We need to do it again.
One of the things, can you hear me? Oh, there we go. One of the things that I think will be useful as we move forward with some of this is that the state now tests students using a standardized test that gives us information specifically related to job readiness. And I think that is providing lawmakers and educators with some useful new information. And Ted, I think you were involved, as I understand it, in getting that up and rolling. Maybe you could talk about what we're seeing from those tests and why it's important to look at not just graduation. We used to have, you might remember, an exit exam, and now we have Ready to Work, which is a test, as I said, that measures more for job readiness.
Yeah. That all? Yeah. Right. Green light on. Can you? So the State Chamber of the Business Community took the old state exit exam, which most high school students passed or successfully completed when they were in the 9th or 10th grade, and it was some basic competencies that were needed, and a lot of time was spent on testing in South Carolina. We really were a leader. The state was a leader in accountability testing, which is a good thing. Now, the argument can be made that we've overdone it a little bit now, and there's too much testing, but the state was a leader in the accountability measuring performance, student performance. So we offered an exit exam that was taken and had no value to the outside, to the private sector. And the business community believes that really the main focus of education should be preparing South Carolinians to go get a job and become productive tax-paying citizens and provide for their family and their communities. So we led an effort that said, instead of offering an exit exam that has no value to the private sector, what if we took something that the private sector recognizes, and at the time it was ACT's Work Keys, and let's have students take that, and that can at least help assess where students are in a language that businesses understand, and it could also help drive education systems to try to be preparing students to attain things that businesses value. So we went from the high school exit exam to Work Keys, and now that the state actually offered a new RFP, the Department of Employment and Workforce and the State Department of Education recently announced that WIN, which is a different workforce readiness test, is going to be administered in both places. It has some soft skills measuring that businesses find really valuable, that ultimately we think are aligning our education system with the needs of the private sector on the outside. Something else that we did when we set up the State Workforce Coordinating Council, which for the first time made all the state entities that deal with workforce training, K-12, commerce, DO, technical college system, both rehab. They sat down at the table and have one statewide workforce plan. One of the things that we also did that's been led by the Department of Education and we've been involved in is, why can't we have a goal that every student would graduate with some credential or some certificate that's recognized in the private sector? And the way we've gone about developing that list is we haven't said, educators, tell us what you can offer. We've actually gone the reverse way and say, business community, tell us what credentials and certificates you look for to show you that somebody has a competency level in something. And we're pushing that back down into the school system, and then schools will have a list that they can say, yeah, we can offer, we have the expertise on staff, and we also have the resources to be able to offer these certifying programs in our Cape Center or in other places. And that's really, we've gone a long way, I think, from not measuring to maybe measuring, maybe over measuring, but now I think we're aligned in trying to measure in the right things with the right tools that link K through 12 to what employers are looking for.
I wonder if you could speak to sort of what employers are looking for and kind of how that's changed. I know I spent way more time looking at the Ready to Work scores than I would ever care to do again. I know that spreadsheet way too well. And I know one of the things that was really striking to me was that I think we think a lot about literacy, and obviously literacy is hugely important and fundamental, but the sticking point for a lot of students was math. And I wonder if you could sort of speak about how those needs have changed and how, I guess, things like math are becoming more important.
Yeah, I mean, so you asked what employers are looking for, and it's amazing, especially in a tight labor market, what you hear. The number one thing I hear from most employers is, I want somebody that'll show up to work on time and can pass a drug test. And that's basic stuff that, sometimes we get in, in the ivory tower think tanks and we say, what do we need to align? But there's some basic things that employers say, especially in a tight labor market, is if they're dependable to show up to work on time and can pass a drug test, I will invest resources to get them to where they need to be to do the jobs we have. But you've touched on, there is a concern that basic competencies, and you go to your technical college system, and they'll tell you that they're making students retake basic math courses and some English and writing courses that you would hope they would have gotten out of high school. But the skill level needed to do the jobs today is not what it used to be. I mean, you go in Boeing over here, or you go into Volvo, and they're basically computer technicians that are working on things where you used to walk around with a wrench, and now you have to have some level of skill, because in a lot of ways we've gone to automation, but then you need technicians that can fix the machine when it breaks, And then sometimes they've gone to automation not to reduce labor force, but there's repetitive work injuries and other reasons that you go to automation, which means the person that's actually on the plant floor needs a much higher skill level than was ever needed historically. So the business community, the competencies of students is not going down, it's only going up, which means that what schools need to be doing can't be trying to meet a level that used to be acceptable. It continues to rise, and ultimately is something that I think that businesses aren't sitting back waiting for the state or government to solve. They've got skin in the game too, and they believe that they're partners in this effort to try to increase South Carolina's students.
And I'm curious, we have Carol from the Charter School Alliance, so I'm interested in what role do you see charter schools and similar kinds of schools playing in this, because it is a different workforce that students are needing to come out to be able to perform in.
Okay. So charter schools is only part of the solution, that's the first thing I want to say. But we have had schools, you actually mentioned one in your article, which is the College of Health Professions School in Orangeburg. That started about 6 years ago. Anybody who's visited Orangeburg knows the challenges they've had in that community. And what people don't realize is that they have literally taken the kids from any school, no testing before they show up, and they had 100% passing of the AP calculus exam of their seniors. And so they have figured out a way not only to get in the math skills they need, but they also are having certifications within the health field to be able to actually look at if this is a career option for them. So, more schools like that would be definitely instrumental. And part of the reason that school came about was that the local school district did not have the funds themselves, but they were able to apply for a federal grant, referred to as a P&I grant, or CSP dollars, to trigger the funding. This is about $750,000 to get the equipment necessary. And so together with this grant and the business community, they were actually able to develop the school, but there's only one of them. And it's definitely something that if we could scale it, it would be great. Another example that could be of interest for the business community is in Myrtle Beach. We have a school, I joke sometimes we call it the NASCAR school, but it's a motorsports school, and they learn skills like welding and the computer side of it that are totally applicable to the job market. But the key one also is that they get ICAR certification. And for anybody who has been in an accident, nobody can work on your car unless they have this certification. So you have a high school senior, when they graduate with ICAR certification, that truly becomes a livable wage job. And so programs like that exist. I think part of it is that these were homegrown in the communities based on community needs. That was the auto dealerships in Myrtle Beach came together to form that school. And working with the business community, I'm totally on board at what will it take to scale it. But we have examples in South Carolina that we could replicate.
So I think we've heard a little bit about obviously some possible solutions there and sort of what it would take at a higher level from the state or from the region. But I thought I would sort of pose that same question to you, Ted, and to you, John, about sort of what does it take to start to move toward improvement in South Carolina?
Yeah, I mean, I would tell you that in South Carolina we have some of the best schools in the country, hands down. And we get a bad rap, South Carolina gets a bad rap. We also have, and I've said this, we have two South Carolinas. There's a South Carolina that my kids attend public school in Lexington that has a top-notch CATE Center, a Career and Technology Education Center. It has clusters, it has education clusters that my kids can find areas that they're interested in and get top training in those areas. And we just passed the bond referendum. I don't even think we paid off the last bond referendum, but the community overwhelmingly supported improving schools. And that bond referendum was an adult training facility, was a facility, a middle college where students could start taking Midlands Tech credits while they're in high school. And I will tell you that down in Charleston you have very similar. In Greenville they do as well. But we have 2 South Carolinas, and there's another South Carolina that doesn't have a tax base. If they passed a bond referendum, it wouldn't pay for anything. There is no tax base. So, what we've said, and the reason the chamber advocated so strongly to have the superintendent of education appointed by the governor is we have an education in this system that's not accountable to anybody. Well, on the local level, you got local school boards. If you survey chamber members, which are businesses across the state, and we actually just did this and said, what's the biggest issue we're facing in education? Behind the teacher shortage comes school boards in my local area. So, and in some cases, we have school boards that don't even have a single parent that sits on the school board. We have a superintendent of education, Molly Spearman, that does a great job and is a partner of the business community, and teachers love her. But she will tell you that her priorities are not necessarily the state CEO priorities, and are also not necessarily the General Assembly's priorities. So, we have a system in the state where, Molly got the authority to force merge some back office functions in schools. We have school districts in this state that have less than 500 students and have no tax base. But they have a superintendent, they have a leader of buses, they have somebody that manages lunchrooms. So, part of the solution that Molly sought was allow for me to help. I'm not merging school districts, but merge some back office functions. So we don't have multiple superintendents, we don't have multiple HR people, we don't have multiple general counsels. So there's a lot of little things that I think it's going to require to fix education. There's no one single silver bullet. But I think the first thing we have to acknowledge is that we have good school districts in South Carolina that have resources and have people that are moving things forward. And then we have a South Carolina that's being left behind. And we need to focus some additional resources and some of our attention to those places that are being left behind. But I will tell you, in some ways, those are the people that fight change more than anybody. When I was in the General Assembly, I served 8 years in the General Assembly. I live in Lexington County. We got 4.5 school districts. And so when I say half, because one district actually is Richmond and Lexington County, Lexington, Richmond 5, which is a very good school district. And so I offered a bill that just said, it was simple, it was a statewide bill that said, there will be no school districts that get state funds anymore unless they have at least 2,500 students. And you would have school districts forced to figure out, not us telling who you need to merge with, but figure out how you get to a scales of economy. And you want to know which districts fought that, or the people that were less than 2,500 students. And they would say, no, we will lose our identity, they'll move our high school out of our hometown. And I'm like, have you seen the high school? Ride and look at the high school in the neighbor next door and see what the difference is. And they said, no, we want to keep our identity, we want the high school to have our name on it. And it was like, you don't have a Cade Center, your teacher salaries are way lower than they are in the districts next door. They continue to take your best teachers. It's really in everybody's best interest that we find a way to find some economies of scale, and it doesn't have to be one district per county to do some things. So there's a lot of little things that have to be done, but the first thing is to acknowledge some of the problems that we have, and then it's going to require change, and change is uncomfortable. And it's being driven, I think, by the business community and others in fast-growing areas and the haves. And we need to focus some attention on the have-nots.
Well, again, from our point of view, the issue is racism and systems failure. And any discussion about solutions should recognize the complexity of both those issues and how deeply embedded they are. We have an agrarian, calendarized, batch-based system that long after we recognize that every child learns differently and that we have issues of race in this region and in this state. And while I understand the point about having there being 2 states, we actually have one state in which half the state is determined to leave the other half behind in its education system. And I think we have to treat it that way. And my own view, having spent 25 years in the business community at fairly senior levels, is that the business community, which drove the change in the 80s, has remained largely silent, certainly in this region, as to the condition of its schools. We treat public education as the object of charitable contributions and volunteerism, not as the talent supply chain that it is for business. And until businesses treat it as a supply chain where every link on that chain matters, and frankly, the failures in this one that begin in 0 to 5 are driving a lot of the other failure, until that happens, chances are good that what comes from the end of the supply chain to businesses is going to be inadequate to our purposes, and it clearly is. I think here in the region, the 4 school superintendents have recognized that there's an issue with workforce readiness. They've joined forces, and they've not only accepted the challenge of needing to report metrics on soft skills, and frankly, a different way of doing academic reporting that's more representative of growth and trajectory than it is rear view mirror stuff, but they have begun to work to embed within the curricula of their schools, and not just high schools. By that time, there's no way to count workforce readiness into a child in their last year in high school and expect it to take effect. They're reaching back to middle schools and looking for ways to embed into what happens in school and after school those same soft skills that we find in all of the materials of the 21st century high school graduate, and in the document that the Charleston Metro Chamber produced here, which is a fairly comprehensive view of what workforce skills are. Algebra 1 is important. It's not the X that's important, it's the solve part of solve for X that's important. And that's a sort of skill that needs to be embedded in how teaching and learning takes place in the classroom. And I regard that as encouragement. The last point about systems failure, because that's my thing. There's no way to solve the problem with bright spots. Right? We have lots of bright spots. We have great schools here in the region. We have really promising innovation taking place at Brentwood Elementary. Failed systems snuff out bright spots. Given time and a lack of attention and the churning in staff and the changes in superintendents and the volatility of school boards, they get snuffed out. You have to approach the system across the continuum so that every aspect of it is treated either at the district level or at the feeder pattern level, where a neighborhood takes responsibility for how its kids in their elementary, middle, and high schools are being educated.
I want to pick up on what John and Ted said. The other day, I ran into a friend of mine who's a medical doctor, and he has kids in school and grandkids, and he said, maybe you need to explain what needs to be done systematically by expressing the changes needed in terms of you have vaccinations and you have booster shots. You don't have just one vaccination, you want more than polio, and you have to have booster shots. So let me give you 5 vaccination and booster shots to make the system changes. So I want you to envision these opportunities, not in some schools, but all schools and all neighborhoods, and I think that's what you both are saying. That's the problem now. So, first vaccination or inoculation. We need to provide high quality early childhood programs, and for some families, family visits everywhere in the Tri-County area and statewide. You've seen some of the data that shows that some of those early childhood gains wither as you get to the 3rd and 4th grade. So the booster shot there, and there's some growing evidence, is that high quality after school and summer opportunities can keep the gains going, and actually a study that's going to come out in a couple of months, double the early childhood gain when you couple the two. 2, the second shot, and that is we need to give teachers the support and curriculum to teach in new ways, to make it interesting, engaging, and probably getting rid of some of the tests and looking at workforce skills. They're very close. That's not easy. It takes a lot of effort, and it has to be done in a way teachers like it. Make the learning interesting so kids want to learn algebra. Maybe it's taught in a different way, or a second language, or workforce skills. Here the inoculation, here the booster shot is something that I think I've really come around. So I'm a chemistry and statistics major, but I've come around to realize that arts and music integration has a power onto its own to engage kids. So if you want to really engage them and interest them, use that in the school day, after school and summer, to get to the next level. Not in a couple schools, but across the region or across the state. The third inoculation is in middle and high schools, where we're really, I think, Jennifer and I talked about, we're really dragging behind, I think, there. Here we need to really think of middle and high school, opening it out to do with kids that take all those certifications. They can be done some during the day. Why aren't they done after school? That's when kids get in trouble and get into drugs. You get a double win. Do it on the weekends, summers. Why can't they do welding after school in the 9th grade? Why can't they do business shadowing? But don't do it just in a couple schools. Think of every middle and high school in the Trident area and or statewide. And the booster shot there is a lot of kids have no idea what we're talking about. Jobs for the future, careers. Actually have a conscientious effort to take young people in middle and high school to visit employers, visit colleges, tech schools. The fourth basic inoculation is really critical. We've got to do something with the base pay for teachers. We have to raise it. We're drowning in the dearth of teachers. Raise the base pay, but that's not enough. Think of how many teachers do second jobs, flipping burgers. So why don't we have a huge array of bonuses, particularly in schools that are funding, for those teachers to run after-school programs, engage the arts, do a tutoring program, set up the visits to the workplace and colleges, and pay them a bonus so they get base pay and a bonus. The fifth inoculation is what I talked about at the end of before. You've got to have the resources and support statewide, or I think probably in this region. And I'm staying with 120 million. Now you might say, God, he's not even a fruitcake, which my wife would agree. But that's actually how much this region it's their pro rata share of the budget shortfalls they've not received in the last 10 years. So it sounds like a lot of money, and it is, but just think about it. You put this all together, what John said, Ted said, think of what happened if we had every school, not just a couple schools, but even on the islands or out in northern Berkeley County. What a difference that would make.
And I'll ask one more question, and then I'd love to open it up to all of your questions. What do y'all think needs to be done as far as communicating some of this to the legislature? What is your sense? Are there things that people in this room can take forward to communicate to their lawmakers as far as what needs to be done? And Terry, you worked with this in the 80s as far as gathering people together to come up with ideas, but is there anything you could suggest just as far as actual action that people in this room could take?
It takes hands-on, and one way is to have this grassroots involvement on the front end. I'm not talking about 10 teachers and principals. I'm taking just in the Trident area, 1,000, 2,000 teachers, principals, parents, look at all these issues we're talking about and come up with ideas and invite their legislators to look at these. Ideally, you need to do that statewide. So we're talking about maybe 20,000 forums, basically, and that has been done. I helped lead that, not because I'm good at it, because we have to do that. So people have to see, the legislators and senators, that people on the ground really want change, and they're demanding it. Then the business community is key. I don't know quite what they're willing to do, but Ted and John can lay out something, but they really got to get firm and say, these are the workforce skills we got. And say, I'm not blaming anybody, but they're not coming in. We need schools that look different, work different. We're willing to help, but you have to do your part. We're going to put 120 million in the Trident area. Why don't you put in 60 million? Or statewide, why don't you fund education at 600 million to fund this whole package? But they have to, and they can't just have a meeting. They have to, I think, take them to the floor, office, and show the kind of skills that are needed, and maybe show them some examples where it works. People hate to have another place up them. So we might be making a mistake by our star schools if you're in those star schools, you sort of don't want to tell anybody about it, because maybe we do the opposite. Maybe we need to take people from all the other areas of the state to the Lexington One Career Center, or all the efforts here in Berkeley and Charleston and Dorchester that are exciting, and show them hands-on. But it's not a one-time meeting. This is like a year-long engagement, assessment, putting together a package and saying, when we come out the other end, you know, the report's going to be at most this thick. But we're going to do some serious stuff, and you're going to have to put in some serious money.
And for those who aren't familiar, in the 1980s, when Terry and then Governor Dick Riley, the future U.S. Education Secretary, were putting together the Education Improvement Act, they went around the state and held meetings at schools with all kinds of stakeholders, and wound up with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people coming to these meetings, sitting around tables in small groups, and they came up with possible solutions and areas of concern based on a series of, I think it was about 10 questions, and then wound up with a whole set of data from across the state that reflected what teachers and parents and businesses and other stakeholders wanted to see or were concerned about, so that they had this comprehensive grassroots energy moving forward to try to solve some of these problems. And I think that's some of what you're talking about needs to be done here. Anybody else want to take a stab at that as far as what we can communicate to legislators?
Well, I echo first what Terry said. I think this is the stuff that of movements that here in the region, for example, Charleston Rise has begun a process that looks very promising in organizing parents and caregivers into a movement to speak to the school board in Charleston County, and we hope across the region, to express their profound dissatisfaction with the way things are. I think the business community needs to do the same thing. And I don't look at the Metro Chamber here or the State Chamber. I'm speaking directly to the business leadership who have significant clout of their own with the state legislators. They're the ones who need to be in Columbia. Lastly, just to be blunt about it, the only thing I know about our newly elected governor is that he thinks the solution is to put a cop with a gun in every school. And I shudder at the prospects of this governor serving in the role that Governor Riley did, which was to arm twist and bet all the chips on fixing our schools. I just don't think it's going to happen with this governor, and I don't think it's going to happen, therefore, with this legislature.
Maybe we can open it up to questions. Do any of you have questions you'd like to ask? Or do we have a microphone?
Thank you so much. I told the panelists that I'd be the first to ask a question, so I'm delivering on my promise. I'm Caroline Malden. For those of you who don't know me, I'm very privileged to run South Carolina Future Minds, which is a statewide business-led nonprofit that is doing business-led advocacy and programs for public education. So thank you to the Post and Courier. Reading the 5-part series was like being at the bottom of a well yelling and somebody finally coming by and hearing me. So I'm really grateful. And thank you to the panelists. Just so much resonates with what you all have said. And one thing to add is that, and you all touched on this a little bit, is we have a roadmap for improving public education, particularly through the business community, and it's not far away. It's quite proximate, actually. North Carolina, 5 years ago, got a big group of business leaders together. In the 5 years since those business leaders set a legislative agenda, they've gotten every single thing done, including increasing teacher pay, sending all principals to advanced training, simplifying the pay schedule in education. Not sexy things in some cases, but really critical to fixing the system. Tennessee, which is now has moved from sort of the bottom of the pack in the country, and it's now in the middle of the pack, did a similar thing. The difference is that they had, as we talked about, business leaders who were willing to put their political capital on the line. In Tennessee, you had former Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist, who came back to Tennessee and gathered together a great group of folks. In North Carolina, you had business leaders from the Research Triangle who, when North Carolina's General Assembly took a right turn and started slashing public education funds, the business community was the one that said, we have to protect our public schools in order to stay competitive. So my question to the panelists is, how do we find that political capital in the business community here? You kind of touched on them a little bit, but when I look around, when I'm traveling the state, kind of taking our message out, it's a very similar message to the one talked about in the report. It's really hard to get folks to join, and John was quoted in the article about how the business community has really changed in South Carolina over the last 3 decades. So I'm just curious if you all have any suggestions for those of us that are fighting this fight. Sorry, thanks for listening.
Racism and systems change. It's not simple. It doesn't lend itself to anything less than a comprehensive, due diligence-founded business approach that business takes to their own bottom line. And unless and until the business leadership views it that way, treats it like infrastructure, God knows they're not sitting quietly by and watching the bridges and highways crumble. They're mad as hell, and they're taking that anger to Columbia. They need to be mad as hell about the infrastructure that is the public education system here.
Yeah, and I guess I think the business community is engaged on this. So I think it's short-sighted to say that they're not. So I think the business community is engaged on this. Now businesses are focused, altruistically, yeah, but they're focused on filling their needs, right? So, Luke Kennedy, who's our chair now, spent a couple $1 million and gave the orbital welding equipment to the 2 local school districts and said, I don't need to know they're coming to work for me, but I can't find people that have this skill. So put this in your CATE centers and start letting kids get used to it, let them get a certificate or a credential. Boeing has some of the best, kind of training, introducing folks to what they're doing here. So I think the business community is engaged, but they're engaged to try to meet, ultimately to try to meet the needs that they have, which is in alignment. Again, I know John keeps going back to racism. I think it's bigger than racism. We have a poverty problem in rural South Carolina, and we have a tax-based problem in rural South Carolina, that if we continue to do things and pay for education the way that we've always paid for it, we're never going to get out of that. Now the reality is when you drill down on money, depending on what you look at, but North Carolina and Georgia spend less money than us per student, depending on how you slice it up. And when I was in the governor's office working for Governor Haley, she said her kids went to Lexington 1, got an iPad when they got to middle school. She came out of Bamberg and said, it's just not fair that they have so much more money in Lexington than they do in Bamberg. And we pulled the numbers, and with all the federal money that comes to Bamberg, Bamberg actually had more money per student than you had in Lexington 1. So there is a resources problem that we have to address. But I think going to the General Assembly and saying we need a bunch more money for education without aligning it with what it's going to do and what you're trying to accomplish is tough. But I do agree with John. The business community does need to get engaged. The business community has also changed. It used to be if you wanted to get the state's top business leaders together, in Columbia, you could do it in 2 hours. Everybody drive here. Now, even at the state chamber, if I'm trying to get something done, they have to call Atlanta or Dallas, Texas, or they have to go up to New York if they're a bank, and they have to get somebody else to approve something. And that's just the reality with consolidations and mergers. A lot of the plant managers that run these plants, they're from somewhere else. They come through for 2 or 4 years, and then they go to somewhere else. So we need to figure out who the right players are to have on the field, but the business community does need to be front and center. I would agree with that 100%.
Hi, I'm Linda Dennis with an enrichment program, an after-school enrichment program called A Backpack Journalist. Thanks to the Post-Inquiry Tuesday for allowing our students a complete tour of your facility. Have a question, and I keep listening for the word parent involvement. We work in after school, which means a lot of Title I students, and for 4 years now, we have picked them up because transportation is a problem in the at-risk community. We have Saturday schools so they can have other things to do on the weekend. How can we get parents that live in poverty to look at education as the way out for their student, for their child, number one. I just came back from Allendale Fairfax High School. I saw empty classrooms filled with welding equipment, cosmetology, and then saw students running out the door. Yet when we did our presentation, the room was filled because it was all about the history. So I guess I'm trying to figure out how can we help educating the parents, because I think if you get these parents going, it could help. I know Molly tried to, I think she's now taken over Allendale, that's what I understand. When she first got involved with them, the board protested, didn't even let her come in. She had a separate meeting and 300 people showed up. So that's interest. So what can we do to make sure the parents understand? Because a lot of parents living in poverty don't understand. They really don't. And we really spend a lot of time helping them understand why it's important. Any suggestions?
First, you have to involve them on the front end.
Right.
So you have to ask them what they need for their children. Keep in mind, every parent sends the only children they have to school, and they want the best for them. Many of them are working multiple jobs. Some have never had anyone in their family graduate from high school in rural South Carolina. So really engage them, but it has to almost be done school by school. And so one way to do it is, some places have done this, so the person who coordinates the after school and summer learning is also in charge of family engagement. And you do things during the day, afternoon or evenings, or even during the day, that engages parents with their children. Family math night, family art night, family whatever night. In fact, a couple weeks ago, I did my first portrait. This is a statistician chemist, because my granddaughter took us to the art night after school, and I was afraid to even draw, and I had to. But children are a big draw, and we shouldn't be embarrassed by them. Parents will show up for student performances. Why do we do one student performance at the end of the year? Engaging Creative Mind does something in the summer. Every Friday, they do a student performance of what kids learned then. Why don't we think about that? So I would seriously put in my list, when you go around with the 2,000 people in the Trident area and 20,000 statewide of parents and 1,000 business leaders, I would ask them what would engage parents more and excite them more. There's a lot of research on how to do it. It's not easy. It's not like you all come one time. It's like they have to be vested in this and find some ways they can help, but don't make it so complicated. So here's one rub I have with the tests we have, reading and math. And I helped design some of those years ago. Now I have heartburn. When they say, your students are 20 points below on the reading test. Does that tell anybody here what you should do at home? No, it's worthless. So, what about if we, on some of these measures, we give parents, here's some tips, but you can't just be in writing. You got to use every medium. Text them, visit the homes. We got to go out of the box to reach some of these families. And other families want to be involved. Some are too involved. I have a couple children who are over-involved in our grandchildren's education, but I can't tell them that. Anyway, there's a lot of ways in which we can engage family, but you have to do it simultaneously as we're getting the business community. You can't just pick off one. That's the key to large-scale efforts like this. You got to get parents, teachers, principals, business involved. And one note on the business community I found, and TED is a great ally. Getting local chambers of commerce and local economic development authorities. They're on their ground. Get them involved in this effort. I'm sure TED, if you call them up and said, we're doing something big in this area, can you give me 100 business leaders who might be interested? He'd probably say yes, and he'd give you their names. But don't show up and send them a text and say, show up in a meeting. Go see them, visit them, find out what they're concerned about.
I think the only thing I would add in answer to your question is that for schools to be more welcoming and inclusive of the families in their neighborhood requires the position of principal to be much different, less the impossible job that it is today. They need to be the chief instructional leader, but they also are the face of the school. And I think to the extent we attend to their professional development, and so there's some very encouraging work that the 4 school superintendents here have undertaken, make their jobs that face and that instructional leadership, they can begin to open up the school building to be the community center that it was always intended to be.
If we're in the back,
thank you. I'm Don Kennedy, and so Terry, you mentioned that it would take approximately $120 million in the Tri-County area here, which I agree that's a lot of money. The question I have though, here in the this part of the state, we are probably the wealthiest in the state of South Carolina in terms of property values. Yet we have restrictions under Act 388 and being able to tap into that wealth. And so my question is, in terms of the business community, is there a level of involvement by the business community to address that?
So Terry got to own up his little couch session and had heartburn over some testing that maybe is going a little too far. I had the same problem with Act 388. I was a co-sponsor of Act 388. I voted for Act 388. So let's put that out on the table. Act 388 solved the problem it was trying to solve for politicians. I was a politician who were trying to get voters property tax relief on their home, the home they lived in. And the argument was made by me and others that why are we taxing people out of the home they lived in? And taxes were going up, and a lot of it was tied to education spending. But what Act 388's done is it's created a divide between the business community, which now is the only place a school district can go or a county can go to get O&M millage. So we pitted the business community against schools and the fast-growing school districts. I live in a fast-growing school district. We grow about a school every 2 years. That's why the bond referendums are needed. So Act 388 is something that has to be looked at. And if you talk to politicians now, they'll say, you're never going to take that tax relief off of homes. You're not going to be able to do it politically. There's not a will, which I think maybe could be used as a catalyst to look at education funding in general. We go back to the tax base issue. Boeing, great to have it. Unanimously, I think General Assembly voted to give them tax incentives, but that tax base goes to one school district, right? And we talk about the haves and the have-nots. Volvo goes to one school district. BMW goes to one school district. So when you look at the nuclear reactors in the state, which are huge, generate huge amounts of revenue for school districts, it goes to one school district. So the problems and the unintended consequences of Act 388 maybe provide an opportunity or a catalyst to look at education funding, because we got the EFA, we got the EIA, we got money in there for school resource officers, you got money for school nurses. So when you look at kind of the way funding for education is set up now, it's been piecemealed over time, and it's time to holistically look at how we fund our schools and to figure out a way to do that in a better way. But Act 388 is a good question, and it's a problem for fast-growing school districts. I go to rural school districts and I say, tell me about Act 388. And they're like, what's that? Because they actually get more money because Act 388 put a floor in, and if you're losing student population, you end up with more money than you would have if Act 388 had never passed. So it's, in a fast-growing area, Act 388 is a big issue. In other places, it's not a big issue. But when you talk to them about school funding, we can't build a new school. We couldn't build a new school in this county if we wanted to because we don't have a tax base. So it's a good question. Anybody else?
This was to the young lady up front about parents in regards to low resource areas not understanding the importance of education. I think it's twofold. And Ted, if you can help me with this, because I think for the business community, it's important to understand that parents in Allendale and Williamsburg County have to work 2 and 3 jobs in order just to put food on the table and clothes on their back for their children to be able to go to school. And so businesses that incentivize parents to be engaged in school would be vital and critical. But secondly, as Ted, you explained, we've got a South Carolina for the rich and a South Carolina for the poor. The reason why is we don't have adult training programs in those low resource areas for adults to be able to lift their level of wages to where they can then be more engaged in the school, but also make education a priority in their household. We've seen models in several areas where they have adult charter high schools and they have adult training centers where parents are getting national certifications and taking advantage of higher wages, and their children are thriving in those areas because the business community is engaged and parents are engaged. We can pay teachers all the money in the world, we can have principals engaged, we can change the system, but parents need to be engaged, and that's the way I feel that we can address it.
Yeah, just one thing, those people in Allendale that are going to work and working long hours, they're also on commute time because they're not a job in Allendale. They're having to get on a bus or carpool an hour to, or 2 hours to Hilton Head or wherever they work. And they get home, they get up when it's dark, and they get home when it's dark. And so we've got to find a way to provide opportunities in those high poverty, primarily rural areas around the state.
Hi, my name is Billy Attaway, and I've lived in Charleston for 40 plus years, and education is very important to me. Maybe we should, two things. One is I love what this gentleman said about getting the parents involved, and so for the parents in poverty, is there a way to incentivize them, to help them financially, with metrics, to bring their kids to after-school programs, so that we can raise them up a little bit and get some help for them and for their kids. I mean, make incentivization for them to take classes and for their kids to take classes. Number two is, can we involve the churches? I know we're trying to keep the separation of church and state somewhat, but there are so many assets that are out there that are unused and that are full of caring people that want to see people lifted up. We don't have to proselytize to them or try and convert them, no, but we need to lift them up. Many churches have after-school programs. Next is I think we need to have an integrated approach in all education in South Carolina, from the universities down. Right here we have a university that has over $1 billion budget that graduates around 3,500 people per year. That seems like a disparity in the numbers. We have major universities that have tremendous budgets and get grants. And I know that they're protected because of their alumni and of the special interest groups and of the legislators in their area. But we need to look at an entire integrated approach with all the money that's spent in education in South Carolina. Any comments?
Well, just one. I think a fully integrated approach like that can happen when the community, in our case, the 3 counties, recognize that the education of our children is far too important to leave to the IHEs or to the school boards, but to take ownership and responsibility for the education of each other's children. Then you begin to get this coming together institutionally and individually of a common agenda and a will to do, among other things, including the faith community, to commit to that which they can do and align their efforts. We're not there yet. Our community hasn't really recognized that we are each responsible for everybody else's child.
We do have examples of a lot of the faith-based and schools coming together. We have a school in Florence that have been trying to open up schools in that area, and it was made possible because of a partnership with 3 churches, and the school was actually located on a church and as a charter school, but it would not have happened unless the faith-based community got involved. But again, we have a lot of micro examples of good things working, but it's how do we scale it and get access to the people who are willing to actually volunteer the time that's necessary. But I know that several of the bishops came together a few years ago regarding their commitment to public education, and I think that we should see something hopefully within that next year, more of that.
I think those are all terrific ideas, and here's how you can make some of them large scale. For example, what about in the junior year of college, just around here, all the students who major in any social service area, what if they had a course to learn how to organize summer learning opportunities, and then were employed in all those summer learning efforts and given credit so they could actually graduate early, saving them money and being a great inspiration for young people. There is no prohibition against faith groups working with schools. Like you said, you just can't You can pray individually, but you can't make the students pray. And most people involved in faith-based groups are happy to be tutors and mentors, but you need to organize them on a large scale to make a difference. And you could in this kind of region. Let's say let's have 3,000 tutors who would come up twice a week in the Tri-County area and work with the main faith groups. You can do these things on scale if you got the commitment and leadership. And wouldn't that be exciting? One of the, I mentioned earlier, the importance of integrating art and music in the school day, after school summers. There's a big project in Dallas. They ran out of artists and musicians. And somebody said, wow, we all have all these church choir directors. So why don't they help with that? So kind of just looking at the resources a systemic way and say, how can we plug them together? But we have to kind of work out this, and we could do it in a 3-county area. It's hard to do it statewide. We should do it statewide, but I would suggest taking all your ideas and at the first forum, you raise those and get other people to agree, and we can make it happen right here.
Do you have 1 minute for me to make one comment? I'm Robin Berlinski. I run Engaging Creative Minds. We do a summer camp in Charleston, Allendale, Bartonwell District.
Stand up?
Yeah.
You need a microphone.
Normally I don't.
Sorry, my name's Robin Berlinski. I'm the director of Engaging Creative Minds. We do summer programs, arts integration in Charleston County. We're in Berkeley and Dorchester 2, and we're in Allendale, Barnwell 19, and Clarendon 1. And all I want to say to address the parents is what we do is communication and trust. And so when we go in a community, we do go in with a lot of pushback that someone's coming from Charleston to tell us what to do. And we start with what are you most proud of in your community and what's working. And we celebrate that, and then we go from there. And then they trust us. And it's a two-way street. And the parents do have to work, and they don't like that. They wish they could be there, but they can't. So the communication piece comes in where when we're on the ground with your kids all day long, we're communicating with you. And with the kids, we're saying, you know, we talked to your dad last night, and he's really excited that we're doing X, Y, Z. Or grandma says, you really liked that robotics thing we did today, so we're going to do it again so you can go home and tell her about it. And there's this feel that we're connected to the family. There's a message back and forth. There's communication. There's trust. And it works. We start with 100 kids on day 1. And at the end of the camp, we have a waiting list of 100 plus. They show up. They're excited. And they go home wanting to come back the next day. So I just wanted to say that trust and communication works for us. And it keeps the parents involved. Thank you.
Well, given the subject matter and all of the thoughts, we could probably be here all day talking about this and probably tomorrow too. But I want to thank our panelists for taking the time and sharing, I think, a really interesting set of perspectives. And thank you all for being here and caring about this issue and bringing some really good questions.